In the turbulent and blood-soaked world of Roman imperial politics, few sibling rivalries match the savagery and betrayal that defined the relationship between Caracalla and his brother Geta. Born to the emperor Septimius Severus and his wife Julia Domna, the two princes were destined for power, yet their reign was not one of harmony, but one of bitter conflict. Their rivalry was not merely political, it was personal, a cataclysmic clash of egos and desires, each brother seeking to claim the Roman Empire for himself. Caracalla, known for his ruthlessness and insatiable hunger for power, was the elder of the two, but Geta was not content to stand in his shadow. The empire was large, and the throne was tempting, yet neither was willing to share it with the other. The brothers, bound by blood yet divided by ambition, waged a silent war for supremacy, a war of plots and schemes that ultimately led to a most tragic and violent conclusion. Born into the splendour of the Severan dynasty, Caracalla and Geta were the sons of the formidable Septimius Severus, the Roman emperor who ascended to power amidst the chaos of the Year of the Five Emperors in 193 AD. In a time when imperial power was a prize fiercely contested by rivals, Severus emerged as the victor, carving out a legacy that would see his bloodline reign over Rome for decades. His rise to supremacy, marked by cunning and military prowess, would set the stage for a dynasty unlike any other. But even the most glorious of dynasties cannot escape the seeds of discord sown within their own walls. The brothers were born in the years 188 and 189 AD, with Caracalla the elder inheriting the weight of expectation. Their mother, Julia Domna, was not merely an empress, but a woman of unparalleled influence, politically astute, philosophically minded, and deeply revered within the court. She was the intellectual and emotional heart of the Severan dynasty, a mother who strove to guide her sons through imperial life. But the palace they grew up in was no nurturing haven, it was a place where ambition and rivalry simmered. Raised in the grandest palace in the world, within the most powerful empire ever seen, the two boys were surrounded by wealth and luxury. Every desire imaginable was theirs for the taking, from exquisite feasts to the finest tutors, from the most delicate silks to the rarest jewels. But despite the outward splendour, the inner lives of the brothers were anything but harmonious. Caracalla the elder was a storm personified, his temperament fiery, his passions swift to flare, and his heart slow to forgive. He was a man who wore his anger like a cloak, and the imperial throne, which he so dearly coveted, only stoked the flames of his ambition and resentment. His nature, while commanding, was marked by a brutal, unrelenting drive for power. Geta, in contrast, was the quieter of the two, though no less shaped by the weight of his heritage. Beset by a slight stammer, he spoke with a calmness. Where Caracalla's temper was quick to ignite, Geta's manner was more considered, more introspective. He was a boy with a love for letters and learning, his mind sharp and attentive to the wisdom of intellectuals and philosophers who gravitated to the court of Severus. It is said that Geta, in his quieter moments, sought the companionship of writers, immersing himself in the world of ideas, and surrounding himself with those who could challenge his mind. However, Geta was still brutish like his brother. Geta took great care in his appearance, as befitting a prince of Rome. He wore the finest tunics, carefully chosen and draped with elegance, a reflection of his desire not just to rule, but to carry himself as an emperor of culture and refinement. But the two brothers, though bound by blood, were destined for a rivalry that would tear their world apart. In the year 198 AD, Septimius Severus, having solidified his grip on the Roman Empire, elevated his son Caracalla to the rank of Augustus, thus making him his designated heir. It was a momentous decision, one that marked the beginning of Caracalla's ascent to power, but also set in motion a bitter and destructive rivalry that would tear the Severan dynasty apart. To secure the future of his empire, and to heal the fractures between his two quarrelsome sons, Severus took a drastic step in the year 205 AD, ordering that Caracalla and Geta, despite their ceaseless bickering, live together under his roof in Campania, modern-day southern Italy. The emperor hoped that by bringing his sons into his own presence, he might force them to reconcile and learn to govern in harmony. But as time passed, it became evident that the attempt had failed. The rift between the brothers, far from healing, only deepened in their shared confinement. In the year 208 AD, Severus took his sons with him on a military campaign in Britannia, modern-day Britain, against the rebellious Caledonians, who were Celtic tribes in the north. Severus, now in the grip of a debilitating illness, could no longer lead the campaign with the strength he once had, and much of the responsibility for the military effort fell to Caracalla. Geta, on the other hand, worked in a role that saw him increasingly involved in administrative affairs. Severus, perhaps feeling the weight of his impending death and the fragility of his legacy, made an unexpected move. He bestowed the title of Augustus upon his younger son Geta. The decision was shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some whispered that Caracalla, in his ambition, had even sought to hasten his father's death so that he could ascend to the throne alone, though such rumours were likely fabricated. Whether these rumours had any truth remains unclear, but what is certain is that Severus may have feared that, should Caracalla alone inherit the throne, his brother Geta would have been in grave danger. Yet, despite the mysterious motivations behind Severus's decision, his actions reflected a deeper fear that, should Caracalla inherit the empire without his brother, it might lead to Geta's swift destruction. The title of Augustus for Geta was not merely ceremonial, but a desperate attempt by Severus to ensure that his younger son would survive any future power struggle. Meanwhile, as the campaign against the Britons continued, imperial propaganda sought to project an image of a familial unity, portraying the brothers as co-rulers, sharing the burdens of an empire. In reality, however, the growing tension between Caracalla and Geta could not be masked by imperial edicts. Their rivalry, once simmering beneath the surface, began to bubble violently into the open. In February of the year 211 AD, Septimius Severus passed away in modern-day York, leaving behind an empire on the brink of chaos. On his deathbed, Severus, aware of the deep divisions between his sons, offered them his final counsel: "Be harmonious, pay the soldiers well, and scorn all others." It was a father's last desperate plea for unity, a dying wish that his sons would set aside their differences and govern as one. But the bonds of brotherhood had long since been frayed by jealousy, ambition, and distrust. Caracalla, just 23, and Geta, a mere 22, were young, ambitious, and filled with a bitter hatred for one another. The words of their father fell on deaf ears. During the journey back from Britain to Rome with their father's ashes, Caracalla and his brother continuously argued with one another, making relations between them increasingly hostile. Caracalla's first move was to dismiss many of Severus's trusted advisors, individuals who were loyal to his late father, and who had also supported Geta as co-emperor. Severus's dying wish had been for the brothers to rule together, but Caracalla clearly intended to disregard this, by removing those who might favour Geta and surrounding himself with loyalists. Caracalla sought to present himself as the true emperor, with Geta relegated to a purely symbolic position. However, Geta was not a passive figure, nor was Julia Domna, their mother, who had long been a force of political and intellectual influence at court. Julia Domna, knowing the danger of Caracalla's solitary ambitions, took a decisive stand. It was she who forced Caracalla to accept the reality of joint rule, despite his attempts to wrest power for himself. Their voyage back to the capital was not without its own tensions. The brothers, distrustful to the point of paranoia, would not even sit at the same table during the journey, each fearing that the other might attempt to poison him. Back in Rome, they took up residence in the imperial palace. Yet the palace, rather than serving as a place of unity, became a battleground of hostility. So deep was their mutual hatred that they literally divided the palace in two. Separate entrances were built for each emperor, and the doors that might have once linked their quarters were sealed, ensuring that no contact could be made without effort. Even their personal security reflected this growing divide. Each brother surrounded himself with a large, loyal bodyguard, each guard vigilant in their mission to protect their emperor from the other's treachery. It became clear that the brothers could not coexist in such a toxic, divided environment. In a desperate attempt to preserve their own lives, they began to entertain the idea of formally splitting the empire in two. Caracalla would rule from Rome, the heart of the Western Empire, while Geta would take the eastern provinces, establishing his own capital in either Antioch or Alexandria. The proposal was, in essence, a recognition that neither could trust each other and that the empire could not survive under their shared rule. This plan, though it might have brought a temporary peace, was not to be. Julia Domna, with her long history of influence and her deep concern for the future of her sons and the empire, blocked the proposal. Her motivations may have been multifaceted. She could not have been blind to the reality that if the empire was to split, she would lose the ability to keep a watchful eye on her sons, both of whom were volatile and dangerous. More importantly, she understood that a formal division of the empire would inevitably lead to civil war between East and West, a conflict that would tear Rome apart. The final act of betrayal came swiftly and brutally. Caracalla, driven by a volatile ambition, arranged a meeting under the guise of peace. He and his mother, Julia Domna, met for a reconciliation between the two brothers, and in the safety of her private apartments, Caracalla convinced his brother Geta to attend without the usual retinue of bodyguards. It was a calculated move, a subtle deception that left Geta vulnerable. The meeting, however, was never intended for reconciliation. As Geta stood there, perhaps believing in some hope of familial unity, the air thick with tension of a brotherly bond long broken, Caracalla ordered the assault. From the shadows emerged the centurions, elite soldiers from Rome, who with ruthless precision struck down Geta in the arms of their mother. The image of Julia Domna, who had once held the reins of imperial power, now cradling the lifeless body of her son, would haunt the empire for generations. Geta had always been the more intellectual of the two brothers, a man of letters who surrounded himself with scholars and philosophers, seeking wisdom and conversation in the circles of Rome's most learned minds. His affinity for culture and intellect had earned him respect in certain quarters of the Roman Senate, where he was seen as a potential counterbalance to his more brutal brother. It is likely that Geta, with his more temperate nature and thoughtful demeanor, had been winning the favor of influential senators, making more of an impact in the Senate. After the murder, Caracalla wasted no time in purging Geta's memory from the very fabric of the empire. He oversaw a decree that eradicated Geta's name from every corner of Roman life. His image was chiseled away from statues, his name struck from public records and papyri, and all coins bearing his effigy were melted down to be recast into a new currency. The very essence of his existence was systematically erased, as if he had never been. But this was not merely a campaign of memory, it was one of terror. Caracalla, in his thirst for complete domination, saw it fit to eliminate not only Geta's supporters, but anyone who may have had ties with him. The purge was brutal and far-reaching, and an estimated 20,000 people were killed in the aftermath. The murder of Geta left a deep level of discontent within the ranks of the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor. Many among them, though loyal to Caracalla, were deeply unsettled by him murdering his brother. They had sworn allegiance to both brothers, and the brutal assassination of Geta was an affront to their honour. Yet Caracalla, ever the master of manipulation, knew precisely how to win over the very men who had been disturbed by his actions. He raised their pay by 50%, a gesture that bought their loyalty and silenced any lingering doubts about his rule. His grasp on the soldiers was secured, but Caracalla's ambitions stretched even further beyond the Praetorians. He also knew he must also win the favour of the people. To that end, he granted Roman citizenship to all free men throughout the empire, extending the privileges of Rome to millions across its vast borders, a shrewd political move designed to solidify his support among the provincials. In addition to this, Caracalla sought to leave a physical legacy that would endure through the ages. His most ambitious project was the construction of the Baths of Caracalla, an opulent bathing complex that would become the second largest in the history of Rome. A symbol of his power, wealth, and ambition, the baths would stand as a testament to his reign, an architectural marvel that would be remembered long after his death. But despite these efforts to solidify his position, Caracalla's reign was marked by a restless drive for military conquest and personal glory. In the year 213 AD, just a year after his brother's murder, Caracalla departed Rome, never to return. His departure marked the beginning of a period of aggressive military campaigns, as the emperor sought to expand the empire, and more crucially, to shape his own legacy as a great conqueror. First, he journeyed to the German frontier, where the Alemanni, a confederation of Germanic tribes, had breached the Roman defences. Caracalla's campaign against them in the year 213 and 214 saw mixed results. He won significant victories over some of the tribes, but other disputes were settled through diplomacy, though the precise details of these treaties remain shrouded in mystery. In the year 214, Caracalla turned his attention eastward, passing through the provinces of Dacia and Thrace, before making his way to Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. It was during this period that Caracalla's psychological state began to shift in unsettling ways. He started to view himself as a new Alexander the Great. As he moved eastward, gathering troops along the way, Caracalla began to emulate the great Macedonian conqueror, both in style and substance. He recruited a phalanx of 16,000 men, modelled after the famed Macedonian formation, and outfitted them in the same distinctive armour worn by Alexander's soldiers. In addition to military symbolism, Caracalla commissioned statues of Alexander to be sent back to Rome, and ordered images of himself to be created with half of his face resembling the ancient conquerors. These portraits, in which Caracalla and Alexander were fused into one, served as a visual declaration of his ambition to be seen as a new Alexander. His admiration for the Macedonian king, however, was not confined to military tactics and visual propaganda. It took on a deeply personal dimension. In the year 215, Caracalla made a pilgrimage to Alexandria in Egypt to pay homage to the tomb of Alexander. But what began as a tribute to the legendary conqueror quickly devolved into a horrific episode of mass violence. The emperor, for reasons that remain unclear, launched an unprovoked massacre of the local population. The bloodshed further revealed the instability and cruelty that had begun to define his reign. In the year 216, Caracalla turned his gaze even further east. embarking on a campaign against the Parthian Empire, Rome's longtime rival. His goal was to bring more territory under Roman control, expanding the empire even further and emulating the territorial conquests of Alexander. Although the Roman Empire was already vast under Caracalla's rule, his hunger for glory and conquest pushed him to press on, eager to etch his name in the annals of history as a formidable conqueror. In a bid to secure an alliance with the Parthians, Caracalla made an offer to King Artabanus of Parthia, a marriage between himself and the king's daughter. Artabanus, however, saw through the emperor's intentions. He understood that this proposal was not born of genuine affection, but rather a thinly veiled attempt to unite the Parthian kingdom under Roman dominion. Artabanus rejected the offer, and in retaliation, Caracalla seized the opportunity to launch a campaign against the Parthians. In the summer of the year 216, Caracalla began a raid on the Parthian countryside east of the Tigris River, initiating what would become known as the Parthian War of Caracalla. The conflict was part of his broader strategy to expand Rome's borders and carve his name alongside the greatest conquerors in history, yet it also underscored his reckless and often unbalanced nature, one driven more by ambition and the desire for glory than by sound strategy or diplomacy. King Artabanus of Parthia, initially resistant to the Roman emperor's advances, ultimately agreed to a marriage proposal between his daughter and Caracalla, likely as a means of securing peace and avoiding further conflict. But Caracalla, ever driven by ambition and his insatiable thirst for power, would twist this diplomatic arrangement into a brutal act of treachery. The stage for betrayal was set when Caracalla arrived for the wedding celebration, surrounded by Parthian nobles and tribal guests, eager to witness the union. The festivities began as some might expect, with the atmosphere warm and full of anticipation, the Parthians unsuspecting of the emperor's true intentions. Herodian, the ancient historian, recounts the massacre in chilling detail. A vast throng of barbarians had gathered, eager to see the bridegroom, their faces filled with excitement and curiosity. Expecting nothing out of the ordinary, they were caught entirely off guard. At a signal from Caracalla, the Roman soldiers descended upon them without mercy. The massacre that followed was swift and merciless. The Parthian guests, stunned and panicked, tried to flee, but their escape was hindered by the chaos of the attack. The king himself, Artabanus, was dragged to safety by his personal bodyguards, lifted onto a horse, and whisked away in haste, barely escaping the bloodshed with a small entourage. The rest of the Parthians, deprived of their horses, were slaughtered in the streets. Their long robes, heavy and trailing, became a trap, tangling their legs and ensuring they were cut down without the possibility of escape. The wedding massacre was not merely an act of war. It was Caracalla's declaration that diplomacy meant nothing to him. He was a man who would lie, scheme, and kill if it meant increasing his power. This slaughter, carried out under the guise of an allegiance, was a grotesque assertion of his dominance. In the aftermath, Caracalla informed the Roman Senate of the victory over Parthia, claiming the conquest of the kingdom and presenting himself as the undisputed victor. In typical fashion, he demanded the Senate's approval and was bestowed the grand title of Parthicus Maximus, the great conqueror of Parthia. This title was added to his already inflated collection of honours, which included Britannicus Maximus and Germanicus Maximus, titles awarded for his earlier campaigns in Britain and Germany. Yet, this self-proclaimed glory was built on bloodshed and deceit. The massacre of the Parthians had not been a conquest, but a senseless display of Roman power at its most corrupt and irrational. But even as Caracalla's violence secured him temporary power, it began to erode the very foundations of his rule. Among the high-ranking Romans who accompanied him on his military campaigns was Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect, a man of high position and responsibility. Yet, even Macrinus, who had once served Caracalla loyally, became deeply unsettled by the emperor's increasing unpredictability and cruelty. He watched, troubled, as Caracalla's mental state grew ever more erratic. As he feared for his own safety, Macrinus, who had witnessed firsthand the emperor's capacity for violence, concluded that his own survival depended on taking drastic action. Macrinus, realizing that Caracalla was no longer a ruler he could trust, began to plot his demise. He found an unexpected ally in Justin Martialis, a soldier with a personal vendetta against the emperor. Caracalla had refused to promote Martialis to the rank of centurion, an insult that festered in the soldier's heart. Together, the two men devised a plan to rid themselves of the tyrant. The plot was set in motion, and the moment of reckoning arrived in April of the year 217. Caracalla, ever restless and increasingly erratic, set out from his camp to visit the Temple of Luna, accompanied only by Macrinus, a few loyal guards, and a small retinue. The emperor's journey to the temple, however, would be his last. As Caracalla turned his back to empty his bladder, Martialis would stab him to death. The assassination was quick but bloody. Taken entirely by surprise, Caracalla crumpled to the ground, his life draining away in a pool of blood. The emperor, once so full of rage and ambition, was just another victim of the treachery that had so defined his reign. His bodyguards were too slow to react, and the man who had ruled with such violence and cruelty was dead. Macrinus, having orchestrated the emperor's assassination, knew that the time had come for him to act quickly. The power vacuum left by Caracalla's death was soon filled by Macrinus, who had briefly seized the imperial throne. Caracalla is chiefly remembered as a ruthless tyrant and a savage ruler, his legacy stained by the bloodshed he left in his wake. The most infamous chapter of his reign is undoubtedly the murder of his own brother Geta, and the subsequent massacre of those loyal to him, which Caracalla personally ordered. This brutal act, along with his pervasive cruelty, has cemented his reputation as one of the most despised emperors in Roman history. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all soon for another History Profile.